Yeah, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking out the time and joining Biome Academy session. We have Siddharth Bharath with us today, and who will be taking a very interesting session on watersheds and wastelands and a different story of restoration. Siddharth, he is an ecologist, educator, entrepreneur, and parent whose work sits at the powerful intersection of curiosity, rigor, and liberation through learning. With a PhD in ecology and years of experience spanning alpine fieldwork, curriculum design, community organizing, and social enterprise, Siddharth believes that curiosity driven learning can transform lives, especially for gifted learners who are often overlooked in conventional systems. Currently, as director of online programs at GenWise, he leads enrichment initiatives for middle and high school students across India and globally, designing learning spaces that are deep, interdisciplinary, and grounded in the real world. At the heart of his journey is one belief: education isn't about information transfer, it's about helping young people make sense of complexity, connect ideas, and imagine better futures. So, Siddharth, if I've missed out anything, please do add. And over to you for today's session. Looking forward to an interesting session today.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Diksha, and thank you all of you who have joined in. Realized uh, my introduction or bio sounds a little schizophrenic in this space because I have kind of changed what I'm doing over the years. But what I want to talk about, I want to clarify, is not a field that I have done any original research in. However, what I want to share with you is some stories, multiple stories that have deeply impacted how I see the world and what I see as priorities for ecology, for conservation, for making a better society. I know that the Biome Trust and all of you do really incredible work in water conservation and all kinds of things about water. And so I wanted to share that with you. This is work done by many researchers, many community movements around forest rights, hydrologists, etc. And I've had the fortune to be introduced to a lot of this. And if you want to go deeper into these, I'm happy to either take more time later or also better introduce you to the researchers who've been doing this. And so just clarifying that this is more storytelling and less a research presentation. So feel free to ask questions at any point of time. And also, as a teacher, I much prefer writing things down. So while there are slides, we'll happily go off into written space whenever we need to. Okay, cool. And I'll try to keep an eye on the chat for questions, but also feel free to just raise your hand and ask questions. Cool. So welcome, everyone. Slide needs to change. There we go. So I did not mean for this to start with a photo of Sadhguru, but here's a photo of Sadhguru. We've all seen these kinds of campaigns, right? Rally for rivers, Kaveri calling, right? If we just plant enough trees, our rivers will be okay. The Bonn Challenge passed in 2011. Many countries, states, and companies have taken it up and said that we want to plant lots and lots and lots of forest, right? And India itself has pledged 21 million hectares of forest plantation by 2030, right? In 2019, there was this really sort of explosive study published where they said that about a third of present carbon emissions can be sequestered by just growing enough forest, right? Such a change has the potential to store an equivalent of 25% of the current atmospheric carbon pool. Okay. And this is really important because net zero pledges from a lot of different companies basically rest on this premise, right? So for example, you can see this graphic has been created by Shell, right? One of the biggest oil companies in the world. And they're talking about how they are using nature-based solutions by planting lots and lots of trees to enable you to drive carbon neutral while still filling up at the Shell petrol pump, right? So trees are good, and that sounds really great. But let's just go back to first principles. And this part is interactive, so I want you to help me answer this. So let's just think of a patch of land, okay? And I've started with just the soil over there. Now, what happens when rain falls? Can someone tell me? Like, here's a patch of land. Should get blue in. There's blue. Okay, so we have little bits of rain.
Biome allowed to answer, or should they hold back?
Unmute and answer. I mean, so the whole point of this is I don't want to repeat stuff you already know. So if you already answer this slide out fully, then I don't explain anything. So there's rain coming down and we have empty land, like just a patch of land.
There are some answers in the chat.
Oh, just unmute and tell. Water seeps into the soil. Okay, so some seeps into the soil and some runs off. What's the difference between, what makes the difference between seeping in and running off? Like, how do you decide how much seeps in and how much runs off?
The permeability of the soil.
Okay. Cool. So for small amounts of water below the capacity of the soil to allow water to permeate, it goes into the soil. And once you exceed that capacity, it runs off. And what changes the permeability capacity of soil? Or the permeability? What changes the permeability of soil? And please unmute and answer instead of chat. Cool. Anyone, what makes more water? I'll call this infill.
The root systems in the soil.
Yeah, roots. So I've always wondered, even as a kid, and so far I haven't seen any scientific studies about this, but I'm really curious that if a tree is putting out so many leaves and so many branches, and it's got this lovely fractal structure where every leaf leads to a small branch, leads to a bigger branch, leads to the main branch. Is a tree like directing a lot of flow to its stem and from its stem down inwards? I don't know I don't know. But in the same way, roots themselves provide highways in the soil. Because instead of sort of working your way around a lot of different soil particles, the water can just stick to a woody piece that enables it to have a good surface tension, and then so roots do create highways in the soil. Anything else? Okay, soil characteristics, biomass, slope.
Yeah, because it's not just, because I'm also thinking extra clay soil, there's more water retention, and then and then sometimes, like if there's earthworms, like even biodiversity, soil health and biodiversity itself. So a lot is in the soil itself.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I mean, I'm also thinking about slopes and monsoon, like the intensity of the water falling. If it's going to come in like a flash, like very heavy rains, and if it's on an incline, like, then we see the Wayanad's and the other kinds of like
Yeah.
landslides. But if it's spongy and like falling slowly or whatever, or there's like barriers and ways to slow the water down along the slope, then so sorry, I'm like that. I'm thinking in terms of soil conservation, water conservation strategies, and so yeah.
Yeah. So that's a really good point, that this trade-off between surface flow and infiltration. This trade-off between surface flow and infiltration can be shifted around by just putting barriers, right? So that you keep the water there for longer and it can keep infiltrating. Okay. So the question is, do plants help this or do they hurt this overall? If the goal is to get more permeability, actually the first question is do you always want more permeability? And secondly, do plants help this or hurt this?
They help with most of the time. Almost always.
Yeah, pretty much. Because if you see over here, they create barriers that slow down water. They definitely increase the organic matter in the soil. And so just to clarify over here, I mean, depends on how many of you care about the weeds of soil science. There's the water holding capacity, which is one thing, which is you take, I don't know, a beaker of soil and you pour water into it and you see how much water does it hold. Okay. Or better yet, you take a tube of soil, which is open on the other end, right? And you've got a filter there. But we were talking about infiltration. So in fact, a desert is the best at infiltration because sand is amazing for infiltration. You've all seen the beach. You've seen how water just goes in, right? But sand isn't necessarily like it isn't the best place for growing stuff. So if your sole goal is to get as much water into the soil as you want, then just be in a desert. That'll be great. But a desert has really poor water holding capacity. The stuff that holds the water is the clay and the organic matter. And so clearly plants increase all of this. And so it makes total sense to say that, hey, plant more trees, you get more water. But here's the other thing. So let me just change color. So now we've got this. Maybe I'm caring excessively about how things look, but it's okay. So we have a nice big tree over here. Okay. Don't mind. I always in school I got my friends to draw my biology record stuff. So I'm not really the best drawer over here. Right. So you've got this tree over here, and this tree has leaves. Okay. So lots and lots of leaves. And these leaves, so the whole reason for the tree to have all these roots and all this architecture is at the end of the day, the leaf, sorry, rewinding, need to put my teacher hat on properly. Leaves do photosynthesis. They take energy from the sun, they make it sugar, we get stuff to eat. And I mean, everyone gets stuff to eat out of it, right? That's not the reason trees exist, but they've evolved to be better and better at this. Okay. But to do that photosynthesis, anyone here wants to tell me what all is needed for photosynthesis? And anytime you feel like I'm treating you too much like middle school students, just tell me that. So
Yeah, we're just wondering uh, who should answer.
Whoever.
That's my thought. But yeah, sunlight,
Okay.
carbon dioxide. Okay, if someone's put some
Yeah,
close.
I'm not really able to see the chat, so please feel free to talk. And if it's bad things, also feel free to say bad things. Carbon dioxide, sunlight, and water. Okay. Right. Hello. Sorry. Okay. So, how much of the water that a tree takes up do you think gets used for photosynthesis or the average plant? Anyone? I mean, clearly, so this is a super important thing that the plant is doing. It's making its own food.
It depends on different like trees. Like
Sorry, Bharath, could you say, but just give me a guess, like a percentage number. What do you think it is? I mean, feel free to guess.
20,
Huh? 20.
20%.
Okay. Any other guesses?
I think more because it's essentially how the tree gets energy to grow, right? So I was thinking more because
Okay, so say 40.
sure, I think actually more than that also, but I just think it's an interesting
All the way
question.
to 60. But sadly, you're all wrong. It's actually around 1%. So 99% of the water that a tree takes up in its roots evaporates out. And that is called evapotranspiration. Okay, it's called transpiration, but the combination of okay, so yeah, okay, actually let me just correct myself. So the water that comes out from a tree is called transpiration, and then you also have evaporation of water that is directly from the soil that you call as evaporation, and you combine the two and you get this thing called evapotranspiration, okay, which just gets shortened to ET. Right. So evapotranspiration is the combination of how much water is coming out from the soil and going into the air from both just physically, wind and heat, and also through biologically. Right. And the amount of transpiration that happens is basically is very strongly related to the total leaf area that you have. Okay. And so the higher the leaf area that a particular patch of land is supporting, the more transpiration is happening. So now all of a sudden the question of are plants good for water depends on the balance of evapotranspiration versus precipitation. Precipitation is your input and evapotranspiration is your output. And what's left is what you have, like precipitation minus evapotranspiration is what you have left for surface flow or infiltration. Okay. And so this makes the whole point more complicated, right? I also thought we'll do some drawing on slopes, but for right now, that's not necessary. Okay. So now it turns out that all of these things change what happens to the water. And there we go. So when is more vegetation helpful versus harmful? Okay, so it's helpful if you have slopes that are degraded, where you've got a lot of soil erosion, right? Because when you've got soil that's eroded away, then you're mostly looking at rock. Rock is not going to infiltrate very much. And therefore, having more vegetation is helpful. Okay. Secondly, in riparian zones near rivers or streams, roots help hold together soil, and therefore you stabilize the bank and stop more soil erosion, right? You stop landslides, you stop all of those things where you have more roots. So basically, wherever rainfall is much higher than evapotranspiration, it's very helpful to have vegetation. But now there's this whole other situation where it's harmful. Okay. Hydrologists came up with this term called green water grab. Okay, where in situations where evapotranspiration is equal to or is greater than the rainfall that happens, then you can actually have plantation of trees, reducing the amount of water available for streams and for infiltration. Okay. There was also a whole other layer over here that we didn't touch upon, which is right now we've sort of stopped ourselves in the top 5 centimeters of soil. The question is what makes it go down even deeper? What leads to aquifer recharge, right? So everyone's bore wells is pulling from the aquifers. And so what's leading to aquifer recharge versus what just flows through the soil and ends up in the nearest stream, right? So that's a second level over there, a place where actually the deep roots of trees can make a difference, because by providing a highway that goes down, any really long, deep tap roots can help water get down. But conversely, it has the opposite effect. I mean, has the opposite effect when you're talking about the transpiration side, because that deep root is still pulling water from down there. It's not just a like passive piece of infrastructure sitting to transport water down, right? So a lot of research has shown that in many places, when you convert grasslands into plantations, you reduce the overall flow that is going into nearby streams. And that is when trees hurt. Okay, so the green water grab is a term that hydrologists came up with, where plantations and plant growth can take away water that would otherwise go into human or agricultural needs. So where has this been seen? This is the top of the Nilgiris. It has these beautiful ancient ecosystems called Shola grasslands. And it's this pattern where there's a lot of grasslands up in the hills on the exposed surfaces. And in the valleys, in these sheltered spots, there are these dwarf trees that are growing anywhere. Anyone over here been to Shola grasslands in the Nilgiris?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I seen Rithi, Nilima. Yeah, it's a really incredible place. But what's happened in the Sholas is in the 1800s, the British looked at this huge area and were like, oh, why are there so many grasslands everywhere? Clearly, people must be burning it and not allowing trees to grow. So they brought in eucalyptus and wattle and started, because this is area with huge amounts of rainfall, right? Because the Nilgiris are receiving the monsoon, and so they're getting a ton of rainfall. It can be very productive for forestry, and the British were very interested in forestry. But sadly now, wattle and eucalyptus have become invasive in this ecosystem. They're able to grow in the grasslands where all the native Shola trees were unable to grow. And as a result of this, studies have shown that within 10 years of invasion of wattle into Shola grassland watershed, the water yield from that watershed goes down by 16%. And by the second rotation of a tree cropping over there, there's a 25% reduction in overall water coming down from there. Now, this is a big problem because the Western Ghats provide water for the whole area to the east of them, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh. So this is not good, right? This is happening because eucalyptus roots go far deeper, and so they pull out a lot of deeper moisture that would otherwise sustain flow in the dry season. And the other thing, which is something that I spoke of earlier, is leaf area. It doesn't want to write. Hello. Sorry, don't. There, lots of L's. My style has caught up with me now. Okay. Leaf area. So if you look at a grassland, it tends to have a leaf area index actually less than 1. So we call leaf area index as the amount of leaf area you have in a square meter of land. So how many square meters of leaf area do you have in a square meter of land? And the higher it is, the more leaves you have, right? So trees have a much higher leaf area index than grasses because they're standing up. So in 1 square meter of land, you'll have tons of leaves on that tree. And all of that leaf area is transpiring, right? So in a system that was used to having a certain amount of leaf area, and by used to having, I mean, the water flows that you're getting from it are based on that amount of leaf area. When you suddenly increase the whole amount of leaf area, the transpiration goes up much bigger. And the final part is that eucalyptus also ends up transpiring all through the dry season, whereas a lot of deciduous species drop their leaves and don't bother transpiring during the dry season. Yeah, go ahead, Meena.
Did you have
So,
a question, Meena? Okay, she's gone. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So actually, this realization has in recent years the Tamil Nadu Forest Department, under court orders and pressure from downstream areas, when downstream areas have realized that their water is getting reduced because of the wattle, has started removing wattle and restoring grassland. Another place, oh yeah, sorry, that was over there. So another place where this is seen is in the Himalayas. Okay, the native oak forests are very, communities have been using them for a really long time. They get a lot of stuff out of them. They have very thick humus, lots of organic matter in the soil, and they recharge the soil really well. But the forest department likes cheer pine. It's a plant that grows very quickly, and it's commercially valuable. It's very hardy. They're able to raise saplings of cheer pine very easily. But cheer pine creates a problem. The pine needles are quite oily. And being oily, they are therefore hydrophobic. Water slips off them, right? And so a dense mat of pine needles basically leads to more runoff and not infiltration, as compared to the oak forest where all of that water is going into the soil. Okay, and so all of these communities in the Himalayas that are dependent on natural springs, those springs are fed by infiltration from the upper slopes. But once the slope gets replaced by pine, and the pine has very low infiltration, instead of this constant year-round trickle, what you have are flash floods whenever it rains. Because nothing's going into the soil, it's just heading straight down. Okay. And this is a problem that started with the British, but has been continued by the Indian Forest Department. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit more about the Forest Department. So I gave a similar talk to this 2 years ago, so some of you might know this answer, but this was an article published in 2021 where they looked at 27 years of satellite data in Kangra district of Himachal Pradesh, okay, where the forest department has been doing lots of plantation over these 27 years. And so here's my question. What was the percentage increase in forest cover that they observed over 27 years of tree plantation? Anyone guesses?
Very less, I'd assume.
But give me a rough number. What do you think?
Like a 2% or 1%.
Okay. 1 to 2%. Anyone else is more optimistic?
Yeah, I think actually there would have been a lot of tree planting, but it would have been cheap pine, I guess.
But this is just forest canopy cover. They're not caring whether it's pine or oak or whatever.
Yeah, they're not looking at those. Yeah, so maybe around, I don't know, 50-60% or more.
Percentage increase in existing forest cover. Right? So the British were logging this area a lot more. Right? So sadly, your more pessimistic colleague is right. The answer was not different from zero. They were not able, scientific study, you can't, 1 to 2% is frankly not different from zero. Right? So 23 decades of tree planting by the forest department resulted in zero additional forest canopy cover. Why? Because for a bunch of reasons. One, they were planting trees that the local people didn't really care about, right? And it's all very good to go and plant so many stems. And like we saw this graphic from Shell, right? The numbers always look good when you say number of trees. And this is a problem that social scientists have sort of identified across the world in terms of ecosystem restoration work, that governments and companies like the number of stems. Okay. However, most research shows that the thing that you need is community-based restoration, like things that people care about. And that's a lot harder to quantify. So the forest department nurseries also find it easier to grow cheer pine than the oaks and other native trees. And so when they're under targets to plant so many stems, they pick the stems that are easier to grow in nurseries and then put that out there. So there are a bunch of other reasons, but Forrest Fleischman is one of was a researcher who at the University of Minnesota, where I was doing my PhD, and Vijay Ramprasad over here, I think is now back in India, but has also done a lot of this work. And they've been working for a really long time in Kinnaur in Himachal Pradesh, and really tracking what makes restoration work as social scientists, not as natural scientists. So it's a very interesting field of restoration social science. And finally, in terms of tree planting, in cities, we've heard a lot about Miyawaki forests, right? So this method was developed by a person by the name of Miyawaki in Japan. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, you plant native species, right? No invasive species, very densely, 3 to 5 saplings per square meter. Like you'd be planting tomato plants at that density, essentially, normally. But here you're saying put tree saplings at that density. And you give them a lot of coco peat, a lot of manure, a lot of biomass, because there are so many trees, saplings in a short area, they're all competing to get light. So they grow up, they grow tall really quickly. And the claims from Miyawaki is that, from Miyawaki Forestry, not blaming the person, is that you'll get 10 times faster growth, 100 times more biodiversity, etc., etc. So luckily enough, just a month ago, quite literally a month ago, because this was published 7th December, the first sort of meta-analysis, a study that looked at all existing studies about Miyawaki restoration was published. Okay, and they reviewed 120 studies that had been published across the world to understand what are the claims that are made for Miyawaki forestry and how much holds true. And they found that basically none of the claims made showed evidence behind them. Okay, first of all, out of 120 studies, only 50% of the studies actually measured something useful. Okay, much of what people are saying about Miyawaki forestry is not based on data, because half of those studies are not even measuring a relevant indicator for it. And what a lot of restoration ecologists have been saying in response to this really strong movement for Miyawaki forests in cities is, why are you wasting so many saplings? Because if you're planting at such a high density, most of them are going to die. You don't see forests at those densities. Right? So you are essentially, and it takes a good amount of effort to grow a tree sapling. So why are you wasting it in this high density plantation? And importantly, another major claim of Miyawaki forests is that they are self-sustaining, that they don't need maintenance after 3 years, or whatever, some period that you pick. But the 3 years was the claim that this study chose to test, and they didn't find evidence for that either. Still needs continued intervention. So what's the point? Okay. So that also doesn't work. And I know Uma and many others have been sort of, and many friends of mine have been up in arms about Miyawaki forestry for a while. So when this research paper came out a month ago, I excitedly sent it to everyone and said, see, finally there's data about this thing that we've all been feeling about, but haven't actually had data for. So now we come to, so this was a rather structured part of the presentation, and now we come to a more open-ended session. So it's quite clear that humanity, human industry, capitalism, whatever you want to call it, has denuded vast tracts of land. I was talking yesterday to my roommate from college, who is from a village outside of Gaya in Bihar. And he was saying every time he goes back home, he is ill for several days because of the air quality there. He put an air purifier in the room, and the highest AQI number that air purifier measures is 600. Okay, and he puts it on, it starts at 600, that reading. Okay, and it continues to be at 600 for nearly an hour before it goes down. Okay, and he thought, oh, okay, maybe this was just the first day, and he put it off later. The next day he puts it on again, and the same 1 hour of AQI 600 with an air purifier on in the room continues. And it only goes down to 200 or 300. I was asking him why. And he said that this whole air, compared to when I had visited him 15 years ago, this whole area is, the trees have been cut down. There's construction. It's not even, it's near Gaya. It's not even an area with a lot of industry. But it's just a matter that the natural landscape has been chopped down for various reasons. So clearly we need to restore. But the question is, what do we restore to? Right? Because this is not merely an ecological question. This is a question about society, about culture, right? we all feel like India should be forests. And all our stories keep saying that, oh, back in the day, there was so much forest in India everywhere. But what actually was there? If you think about, I think about Bengaluru, and Bengaluru is a savanna or a deciduous forest. It's not meant to be evergreen. Why? Because we are in the rain shadow of the Western Ghats. So the much of Karnataka is seasonally is savanna or seasonally dry tropical forest, right? Because there's a pronounced dry season and the forest needs to dry out. Similarly, there's lots of India that falls under that similar classification of being, so a savanna technically is classified as any place where grass and tree coexist, right? Which is neither a forest nor a grassland, but grasses and trees are coexisting. Then you have just plain grasslands. So this is sort of a spectrum where you go from seasonally dry forests to savannas to grasslands. And then if you get even more rainfall, you can go into wet forests. And on this side, when you get even less rainfall, you go into desert. Right? So this is a spectrum of rainfall. It's not only driven by rainfall amount, it's also driven by rainfall seasonality. Right? So there are, and this is something that's confounding, because sometimes people just look at the mean annual precipitation of an area. They say that, oh, this should be a wet forest. But if all that precipitation only falls in 3 months or 4 months of the year, then it's not that, it's actually a dry forest. Okay. So this is a question which, as I said, is political. It's very much social, because again, which time point do you pick to go back to? Which was that original thing of this place? Is it the Bharath of our ancestors? Is it what was written in the Vedas? Is it pre-British? Is it pre-Mughal? God knows. And one of the things that that is a peculiar legacy of India is this category called wasteland. Okay, so the government of India publishes this Wastelands Atlas of India. Okay, it was first made really, really long ago. Let me just find my notes. Okay, cool. I don't remember. But the idea, and so, yeah, the idea is the British were classifying land in India based on revenue categories, right? And timber was clearly important for revenue. Okay, so forests give you timber, agricultural land can be used to make agriculture and revenue. But what's the rest of it? It's waste. Okay. And so even though these are really rich areas, there are millions of people who live on it, and even more millions who depend on pastoralist produce. Right? So people are grazing cows, sheep, goat, etc. Cows get a lot of PR in India. Sheep and goat do not, but sheep and goat are the ones that are traveling all of these huge areas. So I did a bunch of my ecological fieldwork for my master's in Spiti Valley, high up in Himachal Pradesh. And the champas, or the migratory herders who travel hundreds of kilometers every year, it's really amazing. And back then, 15 years ago, there was very, very little documentation about the Bakarwals and all of these migratory herders of the Himalayas. But at a recent conference, I was really thrilled to see one of the researchers presenting was a Bakarwal from Kashmir. And so these people have tremendous knowledge of those rangelands. But as far as the British government was concerned, these people all ended up getting classified as criminal tribes. And that was a classification that the Indian government continued. And part of it is because it's not just that the land yields no revenue. It's very hard to find property title on that land because no one will claim it. It's the commons areas between villages. Right? And the only people who use it are pastoralists who anyway don't have any fixed housing. So for a government that's very interested in knowing what your address is on your Aadhaar card, where does a pastoralist fit? And even well before Aadhaar, these pastoralists don't even fit in a space that assumes that someone is rooted in one location. Okay. So on one hand, these things got called wastelands, and on the other hand, the Forest Rights Act, the state took ownership of all forest land. And people's customary rights were extinguished, and this whole idea of protecting nature from people ended up excluding a lot of people, right? So this over the last few decades, and especially in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of work happening to now reclaim this category of wasteland. So this is a study from 2022 where the yellow is all the semi-arid open natural ecosystems of India, and the red is India's wastelands. Okay, sorry, this red map is India's wastelands. This is all protected areas. These reds are all the protected areas, national parks and sanctuaries. And you can see that these open ecosystems, savannas, grasslands, seasonally dry tropical forests, barely fit in this red area and strongly overlap with this map of India's wastelands. So a lot of people have taken to reframing it as open natural ecosystems of India. And this is something that is being spearheaded in part by ATRI, which is in Bangalore. Right? And say that let's pay attention to these ecosystems are open, they're not closed forests, they're natural, they're not wastelands. They're the place where so much is happening. There have been, somewhere in the last year, studies have come out about the contribution of pastoralism and open natural ecosystems to India's GDP and things like that, to show how important it is. So this is an idea that is hopefully changing, because the other thing is that what has happened with this wasteland category is everyone assumes that because it's a wasteland, it's available for solar projects, for compensatory afforestation, for anything that feels like development. Right? In the exact same way that colonial rule would view this bunch of savages living over here and say, let us develop them. The Indian government and all of us people take a similar view towards these wastelands, saying, oh, they're wastelands, let's develop them. Let's give them to mega solar projects, mega wind projects. And that is resulting in a huge, very important ecosystem actually losing out. Which brings me to the point of carbon. A lot of the climate change discourse is built around sequestering carbon. And in that point of view, a grassland seems inferior to forests, because you can see there is so much carbon in the trunks and trees of forests. What that misses out is what is below the soil. that old grasslands can store as much carbon as a forest, but in the soil. And these are lots of studies have found that. Manan Bhan, who is a researcher based in Bangalore, he did some work the last few years that showed that in some places carbon storage in soil and grasslands exceeds what is held in a forest both above and below ground. And importantly, all of that soil carbon is not going to be lost in a fire. Because fires in grasslands are very common. And this is another sort of colonial legacy of British rule, that since forests and timber was super important, fire became really, really bad. The American West is experiencing that now. They've had 200 years of fire suppression in areas like California that are heavily fire driven. And therefore, fires that used to burn through quickly and not get very hot. Now, because for hundreds of years, you've stopped all the small fires, you've left the door open for these big fires that have lots of fuel on the ground and therefore get really, really hot and then destroy all the prime property that you have near Los Angeles. Right? So the same problem is there in India. In fact, burning forests, burning grasslands, open natural ecosystems was a form of resistance to both the British rule and to the Indian Forest Department that many tribes have done, because it's very easy to start a fire. And I used to think that, oh my God, obviously burning forests is bad. But once you actually pay attention to the cycle of growth in forests, these are fire-dependent ecosystems. And as long as you do it well, fire is renewing that ecosystem. And the same kind of looking down upon has been done for jhum or shifting cultivation, right? I remember learning in my textbooks about how this was an outdated, bad practice that has no longer happens in India, thankfully. But several friends and others have shown that in the Northeast, jhum cultivation maintains a higher diversity than even protected areas in some areas. And in forests that are heavy with bamboo and fast-growing trees, this shifting cultivation is actually really, really good in enabling productive agriculture in a mosaic way that doesn't in a mosaic that doesn't destroy biodiversity. Oh, yeah. So I had planned to talk a bit, and so the same conversation has been happening around the world. Okay, I've been talking mostly about India because that's where we are. But this recognition of that there needs to be a different kind of restoration has been happening around the world. And one of the insights from it, I never ended up making the slides for this, so I will stop screen sharing. Yeah. So some of the insights that I didn't talk about last time. So I told you what doesn't work for forest restoration. So what does work? The main thing that I feel very strongly about, and a lot of global assessments are also showing, is secure land tenure, giving community forest rights. That makes a big difference. There are lots of case studies in India, Mendhalekha and Gadchiroli, many other places where, and this led to the passing of the Forest Rights Act, which sadly in the almost 20 years since its original passing has been severely diluted. It was a landmark legislation, one of the few in the world that recognized that communities have a right and both a historical right and the knowledge to take care of their forests. And it was a way to sort of undo a lot of what I talked about earlier, which was with the British government, with the government being the sole owner of the forest. Right? The problem is when the government is the sole owner of the forest, and the forest has to provide revenue. The only revenue is by logging, and therefore the forest is only for logging, not for all the other things that a forest can be for. Right? Secure tenure makes a big difference. The other thing is assisted natural regeneration. You plant a few saplings, put a few seeds, but allow forests to regenerate from what is there. Protect an area from grazing and fire as a forest regenerates. And it's rather easy because people want the grass for their fodder. Right? And people don't want fires over there. So if you enable the right amount of grazing, not overgrazing such that the trees also get eaten, this assisted natural regeneration makes a big difference. Okay? And this sort of community-led local water solutions has also seen a lot of effect. Instead of large hydraulic projects that then you pipe water all the way from Mekedatu to this side of Karnataka, if you just enable people to construct their local check dams, manage their own watershed, a lot more happens. And what's been exciting in recent years is this recognition on a global scale. So we've all heard about the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Platform on Climate Change. But there is another UN intergovernmental platform called IPBES, the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. They started only about a decade ago, and they've taken a very good stance towards indigenous and local knowledge and indigenous rights to land. And the reports have shown that I think around 37% of globally conserved natural areas are under local control. And so when you enable this decentralized control of forests, that makes a very good place for conservation overall. And it's sort of been a relearning of narrative. We've been used to the narrative that, hey, the ecologists, the wildlife biologists, the forest department, the Wildlife Protection Act, those are the things that save our nature from, I don't know, the evils of society. We show 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, we invite them to do essay competitions and drawing competitions on Earth Day about saying, how do you save Mother Earth? When they've never really had a chance to know what is Mother Earth, they don't really get to appreciate what is the world out there that they're saving and the diversity of it. So we've always approached our ecosystems from a view of saving, but instead if we approach it from a view of empowering local people, that is potentially, I mean, not potentially, a lot of research shows that that's the better way. However, I want to put in a word of caution that just because it's local doesn't mean it's hunky-dory and nice, right? In villages are not happy places of egalitarianism. There is caste, class, gender that are strong dividing factors over there. And any program that's trying to decentralize control will obviously run into these barriers, and it has to be planned for in implementation and making it happen. Right. So I aimed for 1 hour of talking, and I've done 1 hour of talking with very little interruption. So now I'd be happy to have more interruption and discussion. Any questions, thoughts?
Hi Siddharth, nice talk.
Thanks,
Uh,
man.
I, I, I- yeah, I don't really have a question per se. I just want to know like what's going on with this situation. If you know like Go Cuttays of Karnataka or at least in Bangalore outskirts, like those were the places where cattle used to come and like drink water, and those were like the patches of land where water used to get stored seasonally.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so nowadays they have evolved into like small. Again, it's the same situation as the colonial guy just came in and told it was a wasteland because of no water in that place because it's a seasonal water space. And those wastelands were converted into different, used for different reasons. And now, the space for cattle to drink water is basically like a cemented cuboidal structure near temples or managed by temples or some kind of panchayat raj
Hmm.
doing that. So, are there any attempts in Bangalore, like at least in outskirts of Bangalore, to revive these go-karts, or like how do you look into that? Because go-karts previously also helped in a lot of ecological balancing and a lot of activities apart from just cattle drinking there, and now it's not happening. So,
Hmm.
how do you look into this particular situation?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't really have an answer to that. I'm not aware of what's actually happening out there. But around ex-urban Bangalore is a very hard place in terms of like the entrenched interests in developing. But I feel like Biome has a much stronger handle on this with the work you've done in Devanhalli and other places. I don't know, Uma, anyone else from Biome, if you feel like chipping in.
We haven't worked on go-karts as such. We've been basically working on open wells and kalyanis.
Hmm.
So, yeah, they are anyway constructed structures. So we haven't worked on reviving naturally, or not naturally, but many of these, almost all the water bodies that look
Ah.
natural in this region are man-made. They've been dug for the purpose of irrigation, or in the case of Gukatis, a pool for the cattle to drink. And
Ah.
we haven't worked on restoration of those. So sorry, not able to give you any information on that.
Ah.
But yeah, I mean, there definitely, when you create a constructed cement or concrete structure to hold
Right.
water, it becomes it's automatically a much higher maintenance structure than if you were to just dig out a small area of the land and let water accumulate there, because the nature kind of creates its own ecosystem around that, because plants will grow around it. By themselves, fish and frogs will appear within the pool. In the dry season, the pool will dry up unless you refill it again with pumped water or something. Whereas
Hmm.
nothing like that happens in a constructed tank. And
Yeah.
what is most likely to happen in a constructed tank is mosquito breeding. So
Ah.
definitely, it requires you have to then do something to eliminate the mosquitoes and all of that. So
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Nilima has her hand up. Go ahead, Nilima.
Yeah, actually, this is not a question again. It's actually a thought after the Dogukate question. Uh, the question is also, it's not just the Gokates. We used to have grazing lands in a lot of
Hmm.
places, which actually into I mean, I kind of connected it to a lot of things that you said. And
Yeah.
that used to be a very important thing for a lot of farmers, which, I mean, even now I see a lot of farmers struggling with finding their fodder, especially the small ones, right? Finding their fodder and all of that. And, because of this, the so called private owners, which a lot of us are, um, I mean, they have been sold off to the private owners, the
Yeah.
or the government land, whatever it is. So, I wonder if that's. I mean, it's a very. It sounds at least like a very sensible thing to have in a small village ecosystem or a village ecosystem. So I was just also thinking not just the go-karts, but also the grazing lands that are disappearing now and how they would be viewed, and if there are people looking at this.
Yeah. So about back in 2011, one huge area, like 10,000 acres in Chalkere in Chitradurga district, which was uh, which was common grazing land. It was an Amrit Mahal Kaval. So in Karnataka, these are called kavals, these larger grazing lands. It was taken over by the government. The government story was that all that land, that 10,000 acres, belonged to an Australian sheep farm.
Oh
Okay.
God,
And,
okay.
and I know this story because 400 acres of that land, maybe more, was given to the Indian Institute of Science. And at that point, to create a campus in Chalkere. And at that point, I was an intern working at the Center for Ecological Studies there. And there was a bunch of people who went off to do a biodiversity survey of the land. And so this was all that I knew about it, that it was an old Australian sheep farm, whatever, some sheep farm, and the government has repossessed it. And now it's, so it was, so the IISC boundary was basically a bunch of posts and some stones at the corners. But when we reached there, DRDO had been given a large section. The Baba Atomic Research Center had been given a large section. And DRDO was already really quickly building a 10-foot high wall and a road on the inside of that wall. So while we were sort of walking over, going in a jeep rickety, and DRDO had already fenced off this huge area. And it was only much later that I realized that ESG and other groups in Bangalore have been involved in a huge fight to say that no, that is Kaval lands, that is common village grazing lands. But because it went to places like DRDO and IISC and BRC, they're never getting it back. And only then did I realize that this extremely fast putting up of a wall around that land for where DRDO was saying, no, this is my land. Yeah, is all of these things that I spoke about in the presentation.
Right. Yeah.
Hi, Mansi.
Mm. Hi, I just had a question because I mean we're talking about community stewardship of land and how the land is actually it belongs to people and that's where action begins and they know best in some ways in association with scientists and whatnot. But how does this kind of action begin then? Because governments are not going to like take sides with people if it's not productive, quote unquote productively used or if it doesn't reach their objectives how do we re-common land today, like does the push have to come from people, like how does community oriented or community driven conservation happen today, like how do we do that?
That's a really nice question. And I can think of good people to come and address this from within Bangalore itself. A couple of ways. So, one is the provisions of the Forest Rights Act. Like, that's literally what the act is for, right? Enabling people who are Adivasis or other traditional forest dwellers to take control of their land. This is really difficult to get through. So I know of NGOs in Odisha, for example, that are helping people, helping communities navigate the paperwork and make that happen. So there are a lot of NGOs, usually locally rooted in different places, that help people get through the paperwork. But while in spirit, it's the Forest Rights Act is really great. In implementation, at the end of the day, it's still the forest department deciding whether they give people those rights. So that there's a serious conflict of interest in making that happen. The other way is there are conservationists who have taken a long-term view of working with communities. And organizations that are doing that are places like A-Tree in Bengaluru. Then there's the Nature Conservation Foundation, the WCS, Wildlife Conservation Society. WCS was initially very much a forest conservation thing, but they've moved to being more, okay, don't take this out of context really, but sort of historically they moved with it and now do a lot of community-based conservation. I don't want to say bad things about any organizations. But anyway, the good thing is I can say whatever I want. I have no skin in the game. I'm not an academic, or neither am I looking for grants from NGOs or governments for this. So, yeah, so that's my thoughts on it, Mansi. The A-Tree, NCF, they are all running. It's been very heartening to see PhD programs where they are encouraging people who are interested in all this to come together. I told you there was this pastoralism conference where one of the speakers proudly said that you remember the study area from 2 talks earlier. I grew up in that. I grew up in one of the villages there. I am a Bakarwal and I am studying pastoralism in herding. Right. So there are people who are doing all of these things.
I just had a follow-up question. Thank you for your response. That really helps. What about city commons and green spaces in cities? And I'm also thinking about like Bangalore lakes. Like, if we had to think about conservation within the city, are there specific organizations working on that? Because I mean, to my knowledge, A-Tree's work is more Himalaya centric and in some other very outside the city and rural places.
Yeah, Himalaya, Western Ghats, etc. Yeah, in lakes, I mean, there are a couple of success stories. Jakkur Lake is one of them. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the biome folks have a much stronger handle on what exactly is happening in Bangalore, especially around lake conservation. I agree with you that lakes are those same commons, areas that communities need to get together and do stuff about. Like, I mean, Sankey Lake near Malleshwaram is just such a beautiful place, but it's also just a sad place to look at. I mean, you can probably land a small aircraft on that walking path. Like it's wide enough, it's built out of concrete, all of those things, and it has zero even negative justification for being the path around a lake. But because the local MLA has decided that that's his pet project, they've been building and building and building, and so that tends to happen. I used to live near Malleshwaram, and now I live near Jakkur. I go running around Jakkur Lake, and it's such a different scene to see a lake that actually allows a riparian region around it. So I think wherever lakes are being concretized, fighting that is super, super important.
I'm really sorry, but now I have one more question because you said about lakes and concretizing. So what kind of land is like what should the region around the lake generally look like then? Because I mean, considering if we were talking about runoff and infiltration and like what is needed around lakes then? Like what kind of vegetation, what kind of like what are the recommendations policy wise that you'd say would help restore like lake water?
So, well, okay, again, as I told in the start, I am merely a storyteller of all of this. So don't take these as expert recommendations in that light. So this is what I understand of lakes so far. One is you need catchment areas. So Sankey Lake in part works because the Indian Institute of Science is a catchment area for it. And so you have flows of water that land over that huge 400 acres of, or maybe not the entire portion, but significant chunks of the institute that are being directed there. And so if you cut off the catchment from the lake, either by silting over Rajkalways or different things, then again, the lake doesn't have a source of water. There is really interesting work happening, and in fact, a conference happening tomorrow about urban wastewater reuse. Bangalore is mandated that all apartments and wastewater generators above a certain size have to process their wastewater on site. But then that's really great, but then there's no place for that wastewater to go afterwards. So some partnerships have been set up between large apartment complexes where they redirect the treated wastewater into the lake, into a nearby lake. And that's a really, really promising space of these wastewater reuse markets where, so why does construction, like you need water to make cement, to make concrete. Why does construction need Kaveri water? Why don't you use treated wastewater? So that's one particular thing. You came back to vegetation. So there's this class of vegetation called riparian vegetation. It's on the boundaries of lakes or the boundaries of rivers. Right? So one important thing is most of a lake boundary should be vegetation. Right? We don't want to, there are a couple of places where you're able to go into the water. But most of it is vegetation that's able to, that grows in really wet soil. So that's important, and that gives space for, so if you're having the right fish, you're having the right set of things living there, then you stop mosquitoes from breeding, all of those things from happening. So yeah, I think there are probably guides out there about what trees should be over there. I always tell everyone that although I'm an ecologist, I'm a terrible naturalist. So please do not ask me anything about what species to put where.
We have actually created, what shall I call? I call them primers, lake primers. It's on a site called urbanwaters.in. In that, if you see, there is how should a lake be? How should an urban lake be? What are the components? What are the various plants that are needed there? How should you think about, for instance, if you want to rejuvenate a lake, how do you go about it? All of that is there. We have two lake primers and one wetland primer actually. So Mansi, you can check that out. I'll just type the thing in here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your response and thank you for your patience.
Okay, thanks, Mansi. Lovely to get lots of questions. The other thing that I wanted to mention for those of you who are still here is when Uma asked me to do this, I told her that this has not been my day job for a really long time. I am primarily an educator now. And so I'd love to sort of brainstorm if that's helpful with Biome folks, maybe at a later date, about what do you see as the important ways in which education, either in terms of stuff that happens in schools and colleges, or even public education, helps you meet your mandates? And how can we be more sort of strategic and good in doing that education? So help you not just mandates, but your goals. So wanted to seed that idea in for the future. This will, of course, I would mostly be a facilitator in such a conversation, maybe bouncing off ideas, etc. But it's something that I would be quite interested in continuing to engage with if that's useful, because again, as I said, spend most of my time in education and teacher training nowadays.
Definitely, we would love that. We'll definitely reach out to you to figure out a session like that. We can definitely do it. It'll be very interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, Diksha's also sharing.
Yes, the lake brochure.
Yeah. So we have a lot of resources about lakes, and the urban lakes in Bangalore. So if you've seen, like you mentioned, Jakkur Lake, there is a citizen group that is involved called Jalapotion, which has been the driver behind the rejuvenation of the lake. Similarly, there are some other citizen groups. There's a group called MAPSAS, which has been working with about 6 lakes in the Sarjapur area, Kaswanahalli, Kaikandrahalli, Lower Amlipura, Saulkere, all of those. Similarly, there is PNLIT, which has worked on the Putenhalli Lake, JP Nagar. But yeah, there is some problem happening now legally. The citizens groups are not being allowed to work at the lakes like it was before. So we have to wait and see what will happen.
Oh.
Any other questions? So, actually, I had a question. It was right there when you were talking about the Shola grasslands. And I was wondering, and you said that the Nilgiris gets very heavy rainfall. So I was wondering, why is it that in spite of such heavy rainfall, those areas don't have trees? I mean, one is that because they are near the tops of the hills, is it, they are very windy and, the rainfall is too, it's kind of crashing down on the hills and therefore not allowing trees to grow tall. So thought I'll just check with you about that.
Yeah, so I know the person, I know where to find the answer to this. I just need to find it. Frost. There we go. Yeah. So the one time I have been to the Nilgiris was to help my colleague Atul, Atul now works at Atri. At that time, we were just both in the same lab. We set up experiments. Atul set up experiments. I was hired labor where we took seedlings of both shola trees and non-shola trees and grew them inside and outside the sholas. And it turns out the thing that stopped recruitment, stopped the trees from growing up in the grassland is frost.
Right. Yeah, I didn't think about that. It's pretty cold out there, correct?
Yeah. So it's winter frosts.
Right.
So acacia, the acacia trees did not have the problem of the frost.
Okay.
If you're interested, that I found the Frost's paper here, but this is the one. It helped that the answer is written right in the title. Frost maintains forests and grasslands in stable states. Yeah.
Very interesting. Thanks for that. And yeah, and I'm also waiting to read that Miyawaki review.
Oh yes, I'm supposed to write that. I will do that. Yes.
Okay, yeah, please share the link. Yeah.
Oh, the Miyawaki paper itself, that's rather easy to find. Yes.
It's yeah, I saw that it's a free access paper, I think.
Yeah, it's a free access paper. It's sadly that my grouse with them is there are no images. Oh wait, no, there are images. Yeah, but not helpful images. So yeah, this is the. Well, no, I agree. This is a helpful image. So of the 120 studies, 50 of them had any data. Of the 50 of them that had any data, only 20 of them had any control.
Oh,
Yeah. No, sorry. Of 120 studies, they went down to 50 that were actually well done. And then of the 50, only 41% of them had data, of which only a third of those included controls, and only some 5 studies had adequate replication. So basically, there isn't enough data to make any of these claims about Miyawaki, and the data that is there is it's either partial or no evidence or weak evidence for everything, for every claim that they looked at.
so these forests were all in other countries. Are there any forests from India here in this Miyawaki forest study?
I'm guessing there are probably some data sources. We'll have to just check their data sources. There are some.
Okay.
Yeah, there are Indian authors in this data list. So
okay, we should see which ones they are looking at.
yeah. Yeah. So
in one in the Toyota Kirloskar in their campus, which is it's probably the oldest Miyawaki forest in Bangalore.
wow.
20 years old or something like that. It's
Huh.
a pretty sad shape.
Okay.
So yeah,
Yeah, there are a good number of Indian names that I'm seeing over here, including one on sociological impact.
To check, yeah.
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 And surprisingly, you can see that it's being used for revegetation in iron ore mines. Like I'm seeing a bunch of mining related articles over here. Yeah, which is really interesting. Yeah.
Any other questions? We've actually come to the end of our time, but maybe
I just is it possible for you to please paste that link, the
Miyawaki.
person? Yeah.
I think I already put it in there. So yeah, this is.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
No, I just put it in without a label. So yeah, and this one is. Yeah, and that one is frost and shoulder grasslands. Yeah, so the good thing about being in Bengaluru is a lot of the people who can speak to these different aspects of research live here. Yeah, and in terms of hydrogeology of the Nilgiris, Jagdish Krishnaswamy will, or his students would be able to do a lot. Yeah, Atul Joshi, Atul actually, apart from just doing the experiments, he's done a lot of historical analysis of British forestry documents of the Nilgiris. That sort of created a timeline of the afforestation of the Nilgiris and the effects that it has had. So, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Great. Well, thank you everyone for.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Siddharth, and